How do you deal with fear? How do you have the courage to face life? Now, first, the problems of counterfeit courage. Israel, Philistines, mortal enemies, their armies come out and they line up, they're ready for a big battle. And then one man comes forward from the Philistines, Goliath. And Goliath says, choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. And the term that's used for Goliath is a champion. Verse 4, a champion named Goliath came out of the Philistine camp and made this charge. A champion literally is a Hebrew word that literally means the man between. And a champion was someone who fought on behalf of the armies. One man comes from one army, one man comes from another army. They're the champions of their respective armies. They fight. If your champion wins, we become your prisoners. The victory or the defeat of the champion is transferred to the entire army. And so Goliath comes out and he challenges the Israelites to come up with one champion, so they would have a battle of the champions. Every day he shows up and he calls for a champion, and every day nobody comes forward. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Why? Because of who this guy was. Goliath is about 8 feet tall. He also has the most advanced military hardware. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels, which was, by the way, 125 pounds. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels, which is about 20 pounds. Goliath and David are alternate approaches to heroism. They're alternate approaches to how to deal with your fears. They're alternate approaches to courage. Each of them is a model for how to go about dealing with your fears and having courage. And Goliath's model is the one that we're looking at first. How does he do it? Well, you can see it in verse 42. He looked David over and saw he was little more than a boy, and he despised him. I'm big, you're small. I'm high tech, and you couldn't even handle Saul's tech. And he says, come here and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. Here's how Goliath deals with his fears. He builds his self-esteem by focusing on his assets, which are considerable, and visualizing success. He can't even imagine defeat, and banishing his fears. And so his fears are gone. That's how he deals with courage. Gets courage. That's how he deals with his fears. He builds up his own self-esteem until he can just banish the fears. That's how he does it. That's the Goliath approach to courage. That's always been the world's way to do it. The world always says you deal with your fears by banishing those fears because you think about it, you can do it, it's possible to do it. You build up your own self-esteem, you visualize success, you bracket out the possibility of failure. What are the problems with this approach? The first problem is this. When you banish your fears, when you say, I can't lose, I can get this done, bad things can't happen, when you banish your fears, you become out of touch with reality. And the reason you become out of touch with reality is because this is a dangerous world. For you to say, no, it's not going to happen. Why not? Of course it can happen. Christians have a version of Goliath courage. One of the ways Christians do it is we say, hey, I'm a good Christian. I'm obeying the Bible. I'm trusting in the Lord. I'm repenting when I sin. I'm trying to live a good life. And I know, therefore, that God could never really let anything really bad happen to me. The reason Goliath lost was because his self-esteem was too high, because he had banished his fears, and he should have been afraid. Goliath could visualize success, and because of that, he was overconfident. He was out of touch with reality. To banish your fears means that you're going to be unwise. You're going to be out of touch with reality. You're going to be unready for real life. But see, the other thing about the Goliath approach to dealing with your fears is it only works in short-term bursts, mainly on adrenaline. That kind of courage, you can't muster it over a long period of time. How do you have courage over a long period of time? Adrenaline won't help you at that. Most of the acts of courage that we most admire don't come from self-assertion and self-confidence. They don't come from saying, we can do it, I know I can. What we need is not something to banish our fears, but we need something to help us do the right thing in spite of our fears. You need to keep your fears, otherwise you're just not going to be realistic. You need something to enable you to do the right thing despite the fears, even if the right thing isn't success, even if the right thing is a terrible loss. Goliath courage is counterfeit courage. Why? If you're doing something and you're not afraid, it's not courage. If you're not afraid, whatever you're doing, it's not courage. It's some psychological state you've gotten yourself in, but it's not courage. So what is true courage? What's the way to true courage? The way to true courage is to now put yourself finely in the story. And don't do it the way you usually do it. Goliath is not being depicted as the personification of your fears. Goliath is an alternate approach to heroism and an alternate approach to courage. Say, okay, well, so identify with David. No, don't do that. That'll probably lead you into at least a certain kind of maybe more spiritualized version of, Goliath courage. I told you there's a kind of Christian Goliath courage that says, I'm going to really trust God, and therefore nothing bad's going to happen to me. That's awfully close to banishing your fears and visualizing success and becoming unrealistic and asserting yourself. No. Here's where I want you to put yourself. Where are you in the story? You should be identifying with the Israelites. You should be identifying with those people with their knees knocking. You should be identifying with the people who are scared. You're not David and you're not Goliath. You're the frightened people. And so here's the question. What does God give to frightened people? He doesn't give frightened people. He doesn't give them an example. He gives them a champion and a savior. He doesn't deal with their fears through inspiration and emulation. He deals with their fears through substitution and imputation. David is not an example for the Israelites. He doesn't come and say, now I want you to do exactly what I do. He's not an example. He's a champion. What do I mean? Well, first of all, he is a weak savior. Do you notice he doesn't win in spite of his weakness? He was small. He's not got military hardware. He doesn't have any armor on. He has no military training. But you don't say, well, he won in spite of that, which is, I think, the main way we think of it. He's the underdog. He won in spite of that. No. He won because of that. It was because he was so weak, so laughable, that Goliath went in with his shields down. Because David is thought so little of, because he's so young, because he's so weak, because he has no training, he actually learns as a shepherd all the things he's going to need in order to be king. He's going to learn how to use a sling. In fact, you already mentioned he's going to learn how to not be intimidated by snarling wild animals. It's through his weakness that he saves his people, not in spite of it. But not only that, he's not just a weak savior, he is a substitute. He is a representational savior. He is a champion. The closest thing we've got right now on this, if you're on trial and everything's at stake, you choose an advocate. You choose a defense attorney, do you not? You choose an advocate. If that advocate is great in court, brilliant in court, the victory of your advocate becomes yours. But if your advocate is stupid, is ineloquent, it makes terrible mistakes, then you go to jail. You're in your advocate. What happens to your advocate is imputed to you. David was fighting as a champion. He was the legal representative. If he won, his people won. If he lost, his people lost. In other words, he was not just fighting for them, he was fighting as them. What does this mean? That God gave frightened people not an example, but a savior. He didn't save them through inspiration and emulation. I'm going to be like David. He saved them through substitution and imputation. What does that mean? In Hebrews 11 and Hebrews 12 in the New Testament, the writer is listing all the heroes. He says, remember Noah, remember Abraham, remember Moses. He even says, remember David. But then he says, but fix your eyes on Jesus. And then he calls him the author and perfecter of our faith. The Greek word that's used there is the word archegos. Look at David, but fix your eyes on Jesus, the archegos, which is a word that means the champion. David is pointing to the real champion. Jesus Christ saved us, not in spite of being weak, but because he was weak, because he died, because he was tortured, because he was killed. He took the punishment we deserve, so that when we believe in him, God can accept us. And that's imputation. You see, Jesus Christ, like David, died to save us from death, but not physical death only, which is what David did, but eternal death. David saved his people at the risk of his life. Jesus saved his people at the cost of his life. What is your greatest nightmare? Loss of love, loss of wealth, loss of life, your health. But you see, on the cross, Jesus Christ took the ultimate nightmare. The ultimate nightmare is to be alienated from God. And unless Jesus Christ does something about the way you've lived your life, you will be lost. And that's the ultimate nightmare. See, the ultimate poverty, the ultimate loneliness, the ultimate death is to be lost, is to be alienated from God spiritually forever. On the cross, Jesus Christ experienced that cosmic alienation. He took your greatest nightmares on. And what does that mean? If you believe in him, then it means that you are finally safe. You might lose love here. You might lose money here. But the only debt that can destroy you forever, the debt of sin, has been paid. And the only disease that can destroy you forever, the disease of sin, has been healed. And there's a place in Psalm 30 that says, weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning. But if you are a Christian, if you're a believer, if you put your faith in Jesus Christ, that's always true. No matter how bad things are right now, joy's on the way. And now we know, by looking at Jesus Christ, what true courage is. Jesus Christ was the Son of God who became human. And because he became human, he was subject to fears. He knew pain. But we're told in, again, Hebrews 12, it says, but for the sake of the joy that was set before him, he ran the race. He endured the shame. He went to the cross. When he was in heaven, you might say Jesus Christ was the man that had everything except one thing. What was that? Us. And he envisioned the joy of being with us forever, of eating the feast of the wedding supper of the Lamb in the new heavens and the new earth. He envisioned that, and for the sake of the joy, he endured the shame. He dealt with his fears. True courage is not an absence of fear, it's the presence of joy. It's the assurance of joy. It's the assurance that joy is always on the way and the ultimate end. He knew enough about the joy to say, I can handle my fears, because no matter what happens, it's going to be all right in the end, and that's courage. In other words, courage is not self-assertion, it's self-forgetfulness. It's not self-confidence, it's self-sacrifice. And it's a self-forgetfulness that happens when you know everything's going to be okay. And how do you know everything's going to be okay? Because Jesus Christ, though I'm a coward, Jesus Christ is my champion. He took everything I deserve, and now I know God will never leave me. I know God will always be there for me. And the ultimate loneliness, the ultimate wealth, the ultimate death has already been taken away. And ultimately, no matter how lonely I get here, no matter how poor I get here, no matter how sick I get here, it's temporary. Joy is on the way. You can have courage in the short run through stoicism. You deal with your emotions, you manage your fear, or anger, or I can do it, but hope. And see, the Christian hope is the whole universe is a universe of joy, of glory, of life. The whole universe is just filled with joy and glory. And we here on earth are just stuck in this little tiny speck of darkness. And even that darkness someday is going to be taken away. It's all joy. I'm just stuck in this little speck of darkness just temporarily. Because of Jesus' resurrection, because of Jesus' salvation, it'll be okay. Weeping may only tarry for the night, but because of Jesus Christ, joy is always on the way. I can't hold on to that kind of heroism. It doesn't last. But the more I actually take the truths of the gospel and burn them into my life through times like this, through preaching, through the Lord's Supper, through singing, the more I look to his heroism, the more heroic you and I can actually become.